In this video, we're going to try to prove that the Bible, as well as other religious books, are true and accurate reflections of history. The Bible is history, and just as important, the Bible is something that exists today inside the human body. So we're going to explore the idea that the Bible is a living motion picture that comes to life inside the human knee. Our journey begins by looking at the human knee. One of the bones of the knee is called the patella. Patella is also your kneecap. And if you go to Wikipedia and you look up the word patella in Wikipedia, it says the patella, also known as the kneecap, is a flat, rounded, triangular bone which articulates with the femur, the thigh bone. You take the same word patella and you go back to Wikipedia and it says patella. Patella is a genus of sea snails with gills, typical true limpets, marine gastropod mollusks in the family Patellidae, the true limpets. So right away, you're going to see a big connection between snails and your kneecap. And if you were to get a picture of a kneecap, and there's one on Wikipedia, and you enlarge the kneecap, there's a kneecap of a cadaver on there, and you enlarge it, you're going to see spiritual beings coming out of the kneecap. And same with the femur. If you're able to get a femur bone, or I have a cast of a femur bone, and you take a magnifying glass to the femur, you're going to see the remains of snails there. And when you take the femur bone, remember the femur bone articulates with the patella. This articulation is creating like a heaven and earth scenario for the Bible to actually take place. The Bible beings are being, in a way, it's like a holographic projection of the Bible on your knee. When you take that image that's on Wikipedia of the kneecap and you enlarge that as large as you can get that, you're going to see one of the images is a giant being with its tongue hanging out. And right away, you could take that image of the being with the tongue hanging out and you could compare it to Cetus. Now, Cetus is one of the constellations in the night sky. It's an image for one of the constellations. And if you take all those spiritual beings where they are on the kneecap and you superimpose them over a star map or a star chart of the constellations, you're going to see that these spiritual beings represent the constellations in the night sky. It's as if God put the universe on our knees, which is incredible. And in the center of the patella, you're going to see a very clear image of Jesus Christ. So the Bible is coming to life with the articulation of the patella and the femur and the other bones of the knee. One of the other bones of your knee is called the fibella. Now, the fibella is a small sesamoid bone, but the word fibella will lead to the word fable. And if you look up the word fable, it says story, play, also a story with a lesson, and it says restricted sense of animal story. Remember, the fable is actually a snail that lives on your knee and is telling a story. It's recreating the Bible from its secretions. And you look up what are these snails? They're actually called limpets. Limpets. And if you look up limpet, it really has a couple of meanings. One, it means lamb or lambo. And the other is Petra, Limpetra, and Petra is stone. So it's like limestone, and it has a lot to do with rocks and stone. This is like a living rock. And if you look up, the word mason. Now, masons are the powers that really run our reality. And if you look up mason, it says stoneworker, builder in stone. You look up another word, lapidary. Now, lapidary, it says one skilled in working with precious stones. You look up the word lapidary, lapidus. You could trace that lapidary to limpets. So you see that it's all really about living stones that secrete us in a way. So we're going to get into that later. So I know you probably are saying, how is it possible that we have snails on our knees and no one seems to know about this? Well, if you look up what's supposed to be on our knees, it's something called plica. Now, plica, if you Google plica, it says plica is a fold in the thin tissue that lines your knee joint. Most people have 4 of them in each knee. And you'll see pictures of plica. It kind of wraps around the whole knee joint. But these plica are actually the snails. And if you look up the word fold under dictionary.com, and it says a flock of sheep. And remember, sheep are lambs are sheep, and the limpets are the lambs and the sheep. So these limpets are the ones that are tuning in or recreating the Bible on our knees. When you start researching the word limpet and limpets that live on us, you're going to see that these limpets are all connected, and it's part of what's called the lymphatic system. You look up the word limpet and lymphatic, it's very close. And you Google lymphatic system, and it says the lymphatic system is a network of tissues and organs that help rid the body of toxins, waste, and other unwanted materials. The primary function of the lymphatic system is to transport lymph, a fluid containing infection-fighting white blood cells throughout the body. So what's incredible about this word lymphatic is the word fate. And if you look up fate under etymonline.com, it says fate, one's lot or destiny, predetermined course of life, also guiding spirit. Remember, this lymphatic system is actually created by snails, and they judge us. There's a way of judging our internal behavior. One of the key parts of the lymphatic system is called the cisterna chyli. Now, I believe the cisterna chyli is a large snail that lives in the abdomen section of the human body. You go to Wikipedia and you look up cisterna chyli, and it says cisterna chyli is a dilated sac at the lower end of the thoracic duct in most mammals into which lymph from the intestinal trunk and 2 lumbar lymphatic trunks flow. It receives fatty chyle from the intestines and thus acts as a conduit for the lipid products of digestion. So what essentially I believe this is saying is that, fluid runs into this snail, and this snail processes the fluids of digestion. And what it does is I believe this snail makes a photoemulsion out of this fluid. And what the fluid is, if you look what drains into the cisterna chyli, there's something called lacteal. And a lacteal, if you go to Wikipedia, it says a lacteal is a lymphatic capillary that absorbs dietary fats in the villi of the small intestine. What it does, it forms a milky substance, which is the chyle, and that chyle drains into the snail. And the snail then turns the foods we eat into a photoemulsion. And this emulsion is bringing back to life the actual foods we eat and spiritual beings in the food. We're going to go to Etymonline and look up the word chyle. And it says chyle, milky fluid formed during the process of digestion. Okay, we're going to look up the word lacteal. And lacteal says pertaining to milk, earlier milk white. And remember, the lacteals drain into the cisterna chyli. And the cisterna chyli is a large snail that lives in the abdomen, and a lot of fluids drain into this snail. And I believe what this snail is doing is taking this milky substance from our digestive fluids, and it's making a whey. Now, whey, W-H-E-Y, whey is a byproduct of cheese. And this whey is actually bringing back to life spiritual beings. It's like the foods we eat are being brought back to life. So when you look at the word Milky Way galaxy, I believe the Milky Way galaxy is being made right in the cisterna chyli. So if you take some time out and you look up the word whey, W-A-Y, and the word W-H-E-Y, you're going to see, if you trace those two words back long enough in history, you're going to see they are interrelated, way and way. And I'm going to be reading some Bible passages about way, and you're going to see how amazing the word way is. And if you look up a word called serum in etymonline.com, it says serum, watery animal fluid, from serum, watery fluid, whey. You see that? W-H-E-Y. Also, you look up the word emulsion. Now, emulsion, if you think about photoemulsion brings back images in the photo emulsion. And if you look up emulsion, it says to milk. You see under emulsion? So this Milky Way that the snail produces spiritual beings from the whey, okay? And these spiritual beings are being broadcasted or being brought back to life from the snails that live on our knees. Remember, the snails on our knees have antennas, and they broadcast this cisterna chyli. They're like, it's like a television, which I'm going to get into later. Before I read from the Bible, I do want to touch on one other word, and that's called cistern, as in cisterna chyli. You look up the word cistern, and it says natural or artificial receptacle for holding water or some other fluid. And you look up the word vat, as in Vatican, and it says large tub or cistern, especially one for holding liquors in an immature state. And remember, liquors are also called spirits. And that's exactly what you're going to see. If you could get images from the patella of the spiritual beings that live on us, you're going to see spirits with their tongue hanging out, real liquors. So it's a fascinating connection. And also, if you look up cisterna chyli, it says another word for cisterna chyli is called a receptaculum, as in reception. And you'll look up Kabbalah. Now, Kabbalah is Jewish mysticism, and it says Kabbalah also means reception. So all the religions of the world are going to be found in this cisterna chyli. So let's go to Genesis chapter 3, verse 24, and it says, "So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims and a flaming sword, which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life." Again, if you start looking up the word way, it's interconnected in the Bible. It means way, and it means W-H-E-Y. So very interesting. You go to Psalms chapter 67, verse 2. It says, "That thy way may be known upon earth, thy saving health among all nations." Let's go to Jeremiah chapter 21, verse 8. And it says, "And unto this people thou shalt say, Thus saith the Lord, Behold, I set before you the way of life and the way of death." All right, and we're going to go to Acts chapter 9, verse 27. And it says, "But Barnabas took him and brought him to the apostles and declared unto them how he had seen the Lord in the way." Okay, so again, the way and the way, the byproduct of cheese, is the spiritual fluid that brings the Bible to life. We're going to take a second now, and we're going to look up the word Jehovah under etymonline.com. And it says Jehovah, Tyndale's transliteration of Hebrew tetragrammaton. And it says, "See Yahweh." You see that? And most people pronounce Jehovah as Yahweh. You see the way? Interesting enough, you look up a very close word to Yahweh is Yuhu. And Yuhu, and one of the main ingredients of Yuhu is whey. And I'm saying that the spiritual essence of God comes back in this way inside the snail. And we're going to look up the old word for zodiac. The old word for zodiac, you go to Edom Online, it says in Middle English also Our Lady's Way. You see that? You go to John chapter 14, verse 6 in the New Testament. It says, "Jesus saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me." Okay, we're going to look at two more Bible passages and then we'll move on. One of them is Job chapter 10, verse 10. And I believe this is Job talking to God. And he says, "Hast thou not poured me out as milk and curdled me like cheese?" And then we go to Exodus chapter 3, verse 8. And it says, "And I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land unto a good land and a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey." So you'll see this passage a lot with God talking about the land of milk and honey. So very interesting passages. So I want to also touch on the fact that you have the Cisternakyli, and then you have snails that live on your knee. And there is some sort of broadcasting system going on. I mean, you look at snails, they have these antennas, and they're actually picking up waves probably of the way. And they're broadcasting that on your knee. And it's no coincidence that your kneecaps are called patella, and there's something called the television, because there is a connection. They're like broadcasting the Bible onto your kneecaps, and of course your patellas, your two kneecaps, they look like stone tablets, and on those tablets, the Bible is being projected or played out onto those tablets. Okay, when you Google snail nervous system, it says the first site that comes up is a really good site about snails and mollusks. And it says the mollusk nervous system is referred to as a tetraneural nervous system because there are 4 main neural strands. 2 pairs of connectives link the cerebral ganglia to the pedal ganglia on the ventral side, another to the visceral ganglia and parietal ganglia passing the pleural ganglia on the dorsal side. That's important because snails really don't have a brain. They have these ganglia, and these are like brains throughout the whole snail. And if you look at images of it's called the Sephirot in Kabbalah, you'll see that it very much resembles the Sephirot. And it says the Sephirot, meaning emanations, are the 10 attributes, emanations in Kabbalah, through which the Ein Sof reveals himself and continuously creates both the physical realm and the chain of higher metaphysical realms. So there is a tremendous connection between this tree of life and and of course the snail itself. Where of course I'm not saying that God is a snail. I'm saying that he uses those ganglia to emanate out and create. And, of course, inside of us. And when you're comparing the snail nervous system to the Sephirot, you have the idea that the Bible might actually be talking about the nervous system of a snail, especially the ganglions. You look up ganglion cyst in Wikipedia, and it says a ganglion cyst is a fluid-filled bump associated with the joint or tendon sheath. Interesting enough, of course, a ganglion cyst is also known as a Bible cyst. Now, I know they might be saying, oh, well, it's actually because people used to hit a Bible down on the cyst to relieve the pressure of it or the pain of it. But there's an interesting connection there as well. Interesting enough, when you're looking up Isaac Luria, and you'll see that when you look at Google Isaac Luria, it'll say he's the father of Lurian Kabbalah. And then when you look up the word Luria in Wiktionary, it says sea snails. So there's a tremendous important connection there. And you'll find these connections everywhere because it's all going to be about the snails. And even when you're looking up NASA, like the logo for NASA, it looks pretty much like the nervous system of a snail. And I'll try to show a couple of images there as well. When you look up NASA, NASA, it stands for National Aeronautics and Space Administration. And you look up the word aeronautics on Edom Online, and we'll go to that now. It says, art of aerial navigation by means of a balloon. And this is the key to solving the whole UFO thing. You look up aeronautics and balloon. You go to balloon under Edom Online, and balloon from Palla, P-A-L-L-A, ball. Okay? And you start looking at Palla, and it gets right to pallium. And pallium, you go to Wiktionary.com, and it says the mantle of a mollusk. So it takes it right to the snails. And if you have an interest in UFOs and you want to find out more about the subject, you start by looking up hot air balloons or weather balloons. And you can go to Project Mogul under Wikipedia, and it says Project Mogul was a top-secret project by the U.S. Army Air Forces involving microphones flown on high-altitude balloons. And you go down, and it says the Roswell incident. In the summer of 1947, a Project Mogul balloon, NYU Flight 4, launched on June 4th, 1947, crashed in the desert near Roswell, New Mexico. Now, when you start looking at these pictures of these hot air balloons, there you go to, you look up Project Moby Dick, and you'll see a picture of this hot air balloon, and it's covered under some fabric. It looks very much like a giant limpet. And you look up weather balloons, and of course you look up WETHER, and weather is male sheep, weather. And that's I'm going to touch on this later about the idea of weather being about snails as well. So weather balloons, and you look up the word blimp. Now blimp is another word for balloon, BLIMP, and it'll say to see limp, LIMP. Well, it's almost spelling limpet right there. So the word blimp and limpets are right, almost a direct connection. So you start looking up these UFOs, EWE. Think of it, EWE, UFO. It'll be all about the nervous system of a snail. Okay, we're going to take a moment out. We're going to look at what's called the Bible Moralise. So if you Google Bible Moralise, it says, the Bible Moralise, or Moralized Bibles, are a small group of illustrated Bibles that were made in 13th century France and Spain. These books are among the most expensive medieval manuscripts ever made because they contain an unusually large number of illustrations. And when you go to Bible Moralise under Wikipedia, you'll see one of these illustrations or paintings there, and it's a painting of God. And you'll see it'll say, it says, God shapes the universe with the aid of a compass. Within the perfect circle already created are the spherical sun and moon and the uniform matter that will become the earth once God applies the same geometric principles to it. So when you look closely at the universe that God's making, it looks just like a limpet. You look at pictures of the universe and the limpet, and oddly enough, the Apple logo as well. So you'll compare that as well. And we're going to be also looking at the word God in the next little bit here. We're going to look up God as described in the Bible as a rock. So when you look at the word rock in the Bible, there's over 100 amazing passages about rock and the relation with God. We're going to go to Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 4. And it says, He is the rock. His work is perfect. And then you go to 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 2. There is none holy as the Lord, for there is none beside thee. Neither is there any rock like our God. And then we could do one more. Psalms chapter 18, verse 2. It says, the Lord is my rock and my fortress. So, and remember, when you look up the word limpet, part of the word, Petra, is rock, Limpetra. So there's a tremendous connection. And why would the word God and rock be related? Well, there's something called goethite, and goethite is a mineral, and we're gonna look at that right now. So when you go to and you Google the word goethite, it says goethite is a mineral of the diaspore group consisting of iron oxide, hydroxide, specifically the A polymorph. It is found in the soil and other low-temperature environments such as sediment. Goethite has been well known since ancient times for its use as a pigment. So what's fascinating about goethite is one of the minerals that makes up a snail, the limpet's tongue, is goethite. Now, a limpet has what's called a radula, and a radula is like a long track of teeth or tiny file of teeth. And these teeth are constantly being made and dissolved. And if you look closely at this radula and you compare it to a motion picture film, there is a tremendous connection between film and teeth of a radula of a snail. And why is the word goethite so important? Because goethite was named after Goethe, a very famous German novelist. But if you trace the name Goethe, it traces it back to God. So it's a tremendous connection between the teeth of a snail and the Bible. And in an earlier video, I talked about Hollywood and how the motion picture industry is really all about snails and the beings that live on the human body. Even the word motion pictures is like a homophone. If you look at motion, S-H-I-N, shin, the motion picture industry, shin is the tibia, and that's where all the pictures of actually living beings are being projected. And also the idea of movie, M-O-V-I-E. You look up ovis, and that's, again, has to do with sheep. So you got the movie picture industry, and the connection with the limpets, and Hollywood is also another word. Holly means holy, and there's something called heliculture. Now, heliculture is snail farming, and heli means holy. So there's an absolute connection between Hollywood and snails. We're going to be looking at a very famous image, and it's on the back of a $1 bill. So when you Google back of a $1 bill, you'll see this image, and everyone knows this particular image. It's actually the eye, the all-seeing eye of Providence. It's an eye above an unfinished pyramid, and that image is actually part of the Great Seal of the United States. And if you go to Wikipedia and you punch in Great Seal of the United States, it says the Great Seal is a principal national symbol of the United States. The phrase is used both for the physical seal itself, which is kept by the United States Secretary of State. So right away, it says that the Great Seal is actually used for the seal that makes the seal. So when you look at pictures of the seal that makes this image, you're going to see that device, that seal, it looks very much like a snail. It has those two giant tentacle type things coming out of it. And when you look at, you compare the seal to an actual pictures of snails, you'll see a tremendous similarity. And that isn't surprising because if you have, like I said, if you have a cast of a femur bone, or if you have an actual femur bone, and if you have a left femur bone and you look under a magnifying glass on the medial side of the condyle, and if you hold a really high-powered magnifying glass there, you're going to see a very faint image that looks very much like the all-seeing eye image. And that's because the all-seeing eye, I believe, is a nest. It's a nest of tiny beings, tiny human beings. And it's interesting enough, it's called the reverse seal. The reverse seal, because when a snail, the snail has these tentacles, and those tentacles can be inverted in on itself. And at the end of the tentacle is an eye. So the all-seeing eye of God is actually from a snail. One more interesting thing about this image of the all-seeing eye on the dollar is under the all-seeing eye, there's a phrase that says, Novus Order Seclorum. And if you were to go to Google Translate and you type in the word NYE from English and you want the Latin word, it comes up novus, like Novus Order Seclorum. And NYE is a very interesting word. You go to dictionary.com, you put in nye, and it says a flock of pheasants, also called nide, N-I-D-E, and it says I. And it says word origin for nigh, Old French nigh, from Latin nidus, nest. And there's a lot of proof there that the all-seeing eye is a nest of tiny human beings or tiny beings. And that's really part of what the Bible's about, Exodus. You're talking about Moses bringing out the children of Israel. The Israelites are probably in the pyramid, because the pyramids are burial chambers. And Moses leads the Israelites out of the pyramids. And that's really that's why the Masons are all about these stones, because there's actually living beings in the stone. One of the most incredible discoveries you're going to make when you start looking at the subject of limpets and snails is when you look at pictures of the Middle East. Now, if you go and you Google map of the Middle East, and you'll see map of the Middle East, and you'll see pictures of the Red Sea right in the Middle East, you're going to see what looks like a giant snail, or the remains of a giant snail. Obviously, it's just the Red Sea now, but at one time, that probably was a giant snail right in the Middle East. And you look at pictures there, and you go to Wikipedia, and you'll see there's like, on the Red Sea, there's two giant arms at the end there. One of the arms of the sea goes to Egypt, and one of the arms goes towards Israel. And I believe that has a lot to do with the Bible, and this is actually probably going to be the 100% proof that the Bible is accurate. When you look at Exodus and the word arm in the Bible, there's a tremendous connection between snails and arms. And I'm going to read some Bible passages and explain that the children of Israel and Moses led the people of Israel out of Egypt into the promised land through the snail. And I'm going to get to some passages in the Bible, and we're going to discover this together here. Before we start reading some Bible passages about arms in the King James Bible, we're going to look at a picture. When you Google snail eye anatomy, there's a really good illustration of an anatomically correct eye of a snail. And remember, snails have a tentacle, and some have an eye at the start of the tentacle, and some have the eye at the front of the tentacle. But inside the tentacle, if you look closely, the snail has what's like the muscles look like arms and hands inside the tentacle. It's incredible. There's an image on this website here. I'm bringing it up, and that's very important. So if you go and you look at the idea that that the Red Sea at one time had a giant snail on it, and that snail probably created the Red Sea. You look at Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 15. It says, "And remember that thou wast a servant in the land of Egypt, and that the Lord thy God brought thee out thence through a mighty hand and by a stretched out arm." Okay, so let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 26, verse 8. And it says, "And the Lord brought us forth out of Egypt with a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm." You go to 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 36. It says, "But the Lord, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt with great power and a stretched out arm, him shall ye fear, and him shall ye worship." And you go to Jeremiah chapter 27, verse 5, and it says, God speaking here, he says, "I have made the earth, the man, and the beasts that are upon the ground by my great power and by my outstretched arm." And interesting enough, you go and look at paintings in the Vatican, the Sistine Chapel with Michelangelo. He painted these pictures of God, and one of them is God is creating the earth. God is creating the sun and the moon, and he has his arms stretched out, and at the end of his arms, his hands, he has the sun and the moon. And it's just incredible, because that's really what our whole universe is. It's really regarding these tentacles. And you look at, if you go and you look up spiral arm of the sun, or it'll say the Milky Way has 4 main spiral arms: the Norma and Cygnus arm, Sagittarius, Scutums, Crux, and Perseus. The sun is located in a minor arm, you see? So the whole thing is really a creation of, God is creating with these limpets or snails, he's creating the whole universe. So there's just one more verse I'd like to read of the Bible here. It's chapter 32, verse 17. It says, "Ah, Lord God, behold, thou hast made the heaven and the earth by thy great power and stretched out arm." Very interesting Bible passages there about the arm. So just to wrap up this section, essentially when you look up the word weather, W-E-T-H-E-R, and you look up the word wheat, W-H-E-A-T, there's a very close similarity there. And weather is regarding sheep. And when I talk about sheep, when I talk about lambs and sheep, I'm actually talking about snails that live on our body. And that the original words are actually talking, when they talk about lambs and sheep, they're actually talking about these beings that live on us. So that's essentially a connection, because our weather is about weather, in a way. It's and that's a subject I'm going to be talking about here is the idea of something called the world turtle. Now, the world turtle is the idea that the earth is actually on the back of a turtle. And if you look at the myths of this, the Native American myths, ideas about this, it's really a symbol or a metaphor, I guess, for the idea that it's really our life is really living. We're living on a snail. And the exact location, I really don't know. You look at the idea of possibly in the mouth area, because the Bible has some incredible verses about the earth being in a mouth. I'm going to try to get to that right now. So I'm going to read a couple of Bible verses right now. And I just want to make sure people realize that I'm not saying just the Bible is 100% accurate. I'm sure if you're a Muslim or a Hindu and you're reading your religious book, I'm sure the Creator made that accurate as well. So I don't want you to think I'm just saying the Bible, but I would question the other things in life. I mean, if we were able to study the Bible as a true science document, we would probably figure all this out very quickly. So we're gonna look at Earth in the Bible, and it says now, and in Genesis chapter 4, verse 11, it says, "And now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand." And then we go and we look up Numbers chapter 16, verse 30, and it says, "But if the Lord make a new thing, and the earth open her mouth and swallow them up." So essentially, what is going on in the mouth of a snail? Well, a snail in the mouth has this giant, this tract. It's called a radula, and it's little tiny teeth. And if you look closely and you look at a piece of motion picture film, it's very similar. So there's like new photographic life being made in the mouth of a snail. And interesting enough, if you look at the idea that there is something called world turtle, which I mentioned, and that the idea of a turtle's all the way down. Now, what that means is there are like turtles on top of turtles, but the turtle is a cover story for the fact that there are snails. And what the role of a snail is possibly to reprocess excrement. So I know that sounds a little gross, but if you look at the ancient Egyptians' idea of the sun, and it's represented by a scarab, and a scarab that rolls a ball of dung around. And if you look up scarab and you look up the word escargot, which is snail, there's a very close similarity there. So the sun is like a ball of excrement that is that rolls across the sky, and it shines down like vitamin D and some form of excrement from a higher civilization, or maybe our own civilization, which goes around and around. I mean, you have the idea of an Ouroboros, which is a giant serpent that eats its own tail, and that's like a symbol for this eating of the excrement. And I'm going to get into a little bit more of that right now. So we're just going to look at a few words, important words in our society to help understand this idea of reprocessing foods in a way. You look at the way the sun is supposed to travel about in our sky. It's known as an analemma. It's spelled A-N-A-L-E-M-M-A. So that's interesting. And the important word is for physics. Physics, you look up P-H-Y-S-I-C, physic, it means laxative. That's what that means. Also galaxy, and you look up galaxy in connection to the word laxative, another very interesting connection there. So you're going to find a lot of connections when you look up Rome or Romanus, A-N-U-S, or the old spelling for Vatican, Vaticanus, A-N-U-S at the end. This is nothing attack on anything. I'm just saying that there's some people that know the connection of what's actually going on in the universe with this idea of reprocessing excrement. So that's all interesting connections, which I'm going to obviously put on a much bigger video. So I just also wanted to mention that I have this book called A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. It's a very famous science book. And on the very first page, the very first chapter, first page, he talks about this one day, this famous lecture guy was giving a lecture on science and physics, and a lady from the audience stood up and said, "Oh, you know, this is all nonsense. It's turtles all the way down. That's what our universe is about." And, Stephen Hawking really says, well, I'm not sure we know any better than that. It could be turtles all the way down. If you read the first page, it seems to imply that. And, of course, it really isn't turtles, because turtles, and you look up turtle, it leads to tortoise. Tortoise is shell. And that could be, of course, a snail connection as well, because you look up the fact that the Earth has 4 layers. The crust, the mantle, the inner core, the outer core. Well, crust, if you look up crust, it's going to mean shell. You look up mantle. A mantle is something that secretes the shell. So right away, and of course, core is heart. So you look at the idea that it's right there in plain sight, that we're living on a giant limpet or giant snail, and maybe attached to other snails in a way of reprocessing excrement from a higher civilization. One of the most interesting parts about snails is when you research snails, snails seem to attract a lot of interesting parasites. Very, very strange parasitical worms seem to come out of snails. And one of those is called Schistosoma mansoni. And if you go to Wikipedia, it says Schistosoma mansoni is a waterborne parasite of humans and belongs to the group of blood flukes. The adult lives in the blood vessels near the human intestine. So a lot of countries are plagued by this worm. It actually is a problem in third world countries, but I think it's a very interesting and secretive part of what goes on in our lives. This Schistosoma mansoni, if you look, it's actually 2 worms, male and female, linked together kind of at the hip. And if you go to the Bible, there is some incredible passages about worms that might actually have some relevance to this. Now, remember the word Schistosoma mansoni. That's what it's called, mansoni. And if you go to Job chapter 25, verse 6, it says, "How much less man that is a worm, and the son of man, which is a worm." You go to Isaiah chapter 41, verse 14, and this is God speaking. He says, "Fear not, thou worm Jacob, and ye men of Israel. I will help thee, saith the Lord, and thy Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel." So remember the word, the name Schistosoma mansoni, and then you go to John chapter 3, verse 13 in the New Testament, and Jesus says, "And no man hath ascended up to heaven, but he that came down from heaven, even the Son of Man, which is in heaven." So I think there's an interesting connection with the worms coming out of a snail. And also, the symbols for the World Health Organization and the symbols for the emergency medical uses, which is the worms, like worms on a staff or worms on a pole. And when you start looking at one of those symbols, one of them is called the rod of Asclepius, and I'm going to show some pictures right now. When you go to Google, you'll see a lot of images of the rod of Asclepius, and it's mostly used in all the medical industries. You can look on emergency vehicles, and you'll see the rod of Asclepius, which is a serpent or a worm wrapped around a stake or a pole or a rod. And you'll see this image for the World Health Organization. If you go and look, if you look at the World Health Organization, in the center of the UN logo is this rod of Asclepius. And if you go to Wikipedia and you look up rod of Asclepius, it's also spelled, it's also known as the staff of Asclepius. You see that? Lapius. And you could trace that word, lapius, back to lapidary, and that also will trace back to limpet. And why is that important? Because when you look at pictures of limpets, there's a really good photograph of a limpet's back on Google, and you'll see that on the backside of a limpet, it very much looks like, I know limpets don't have a spine, but it looks very much like the spine of a limpet is the rod of Asclepius. So you'll see that. I'll show that picture right now. And there it is. You'll see the rod of Asclepius on the back of a limpet. And the idea is that that new life is probably coming out of that rod in the form of parasites. Parasites are what probably create human life in a way. I'm going to talk about another parasite that comes out of a snail, and I'll bring up those images right now. And we're looking at pictures of what's called zombie snails. And zombie snails have parasites that live in the tentacles of the snail, or the antennas. They have these worms that come out of the antennas of the snail. And these parasites are called Leucochloridium paradoxum. And you go to Wikipedia, you look up, and it says Leucochloridium paradoxum, the green-banded broodsac, is a parasitic flatworm that uses gastropods as an intermediate host. It is typically found in land snails of the genus Succinia. So Succinia is a key word. You look up Succinia, and Succinia is the common name for amber snails. And you look up under Wiktionary, it says Succinum, means from succus. It says amber. So there is a very, very big secret, I believe, to life. And this is this amber snails and the word amber and ambergris. Now, ambergris is something found in the, it's part of the excrement of sperm whales. And you might say, well, how does that have anything to do with human life? But ambergris is used a lot in the perfume industry. And I believe it's also a very big secret part of Hollywood. If you were to look at pictures of what's called the Grauman's Chinese Theater, well, in the courtyard of the theater, there's this place where actors and movie stars, they press their hands and their shoes into this concrete type substance. And I believe that is like a symbol for ambergris, because inside of us we have these snails, and they secrete out this ambergris. And I believe it's linked to actual sperm. And actually, new life could be coming from these snails. Okay, we're going to look at one more subject now, and that's the coronavirus. And when you research the word corona, and you go to etymonline.com or other etymology dictionaries, you're going to come across a word spelled C-A-R-O-N-I-A, coronia. It's going to be listed, if you go to etymonline.com, it's going to be listed under carrion, and it's going to be listed under crone. And under carrion, carrion means a dead body, dead and putrefying flesh of animals. Okay, you'll see the word coronia there listed as well. You go to crone, and you'll see coronia listed, and it says it actually means old sheep. And when I'm talking about sheep and lambs in this presentation, I'm actually talking about lambs limpets, snails are lambs in a way. They're if you look up the word, as I mentioned, you look up the word limpets, it has a lot to do with lambs. And lambs are sheep. And our whole lymphatic system, which is one of our immune systems in the body, is made up of these limpets. And I believe one of the limpets would probably passed on and is dying or dead inside of us, and is possibly causing that virus to go out of control. It's like, what I believe is happening is actually the age of Aquarius completely upon us. And age of Aquarius is all about a pitcher of water being poured down on humanity and causing this new way of thinking. And this goes back to, even if you look up the word for, like if you look up Woodstock and the Rock Festival in 1969, it's actually listed, and it says Woodstock was an Aquarian exposition. So this idea of age of Aquarius is probably completely upon humanity. And, it may end up being a good thing out of all this tragedy, because internally we have snails, and these snails have antennas. And these antennas are probably picking up signals of our lives. They probably have a way of judging us. And there's a new wave that hit this snail, or the main snail in the intestinal tract, and it caused the snail to probably pass on. And when I say new wave, I mean actual waves of energy, in a way that probably the antennas have picked up. You look at antennas, and they pick up signals from waves. And if you go to like a store that sells antennas, and they'll sell something called a corona ball, and a corona ball is a ball at the end of an antenna. They're called corona balls. So that's a very interesting connection to the fact there's a new wave hitting humanity, or hitting the main snail in the lymphatic system. So when you look at age of Aquarius, or Aquarius symbols, you're going to see it has to do with a man pouring down a pitcher of water, or a woman pouring down a pitcher of water. And the pitcher of water alone is a symbol for the age of Aquarius. And that pitcher is called a ewer, E-W-E-R. And remember, E-W-E is sheep. So the ewer, you go to etymonline.com, and it says water pitcher with a wide spout, water pitcher, and it says Latin Aquarius, and it says water carrier. So you go, and there is your connection to carry-on, and you go to carrier, and it says meaning, person or animal that carries and disseminates infection without suffering obvious disease. So that it's also possible that the snail is actually not, dead. It's just possibly spreading a virus, or spreading a new way of thinking, and this new energy waves coming out of the antennas of the snail are causing a lot of sickness inside of people. So again, when you have time, look up the words for the Aquarius and the idea of water. When I'm talking about water, you look up L-Y-M-P-H, lymph. And lymph is the fluid out of the lymphatic system, and it's known as pure water. And if you look up the word pure, it means lamb, pure lamb pouring down on humanity.